Imagine uncovering a secret so shocking it changes everything, just like Olivia did. What would you do in her shoes? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because tomorrow, I have an even more explosive story you won't want to miss. Trust me, this one will keep you on the edge of your seat. Like button if you're ready for the next twist. See you tomorrow. A birthday party turned nightmare, and it was all caught on camera. The birthday party betrayal. The rooftop terrace of the Lexington Grand shimmered under the golden glow of Manhattan's skyline. Everything about the evening was flawless, just as Margaret Carter had planned. White orchids adorned every surface, their delicate fragrance blending with the crisp night air. Crystal chandeliers hung above the elegantly dressed guests, casting shimmering reflections against the floor-to-ceiling glass panels. Tonight was Olivia Carter's 35th birthday. A celebration meant to cement her status as the perfect wife to Ethan Carter, heir to the Carter family fortune. But Olivia knew better. This wasn't just a party. It was a performance, a carefully orchestrated event where every guest had been hand-selected, every detail controlled. And at the center of it all stood Margaret, ever the matriarch, her midnight blue gown as regal as the empire she commanded. Ethan stood beside Olivia, his tailored suit impeccable, his posture stiff. He had barely spoken to her all evening, glancing at his mother for silent approval before each polite interaction. Olivia had grown used to it. Over the years, she had learned to recognize the subtle signs of his conditioning, the way his jaw clenched whenever Margaret whispered in his ear, the flicker of hesitation before responding to Olivia, as if waiting for instructions. The moment came suddenly. 1 second, Olivia was lifting a champagne flute, offering a poised smile to a state senator. The next, Margaret leaned in, her voice a whisper against Ethan's ear. Whatever she said took less than 2 seconds, but the transformation was immediate. Olivia saw it before she felt it, the way his pupils shrank, his posture stiffened, his breathing changed. A split second later, the slap landed, hard and sharp across her cheek. A collective gasp rippled through the terrace. The sound of the impact echoed against the glass walls, ringing louder than the chatter, louder than the music. Olivia stumbled, her vision blurring momentarily as she crashed against the gift table. The cold marble edge pressed into her ribs, the taste of blood blooming in her mouth. For a long, stretched-out moment, silence hung in the air. The guests, New York's elite, business moguls, politicians, stood frozen, their eyes darting between Olivia and Ethan. But she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Margaret, who remained calm, her expression unreadable, watching Olivia the way one might observe a chessboard after making the winning move. And then Olivia did something no one expected. She laughed. It started as a quiet chuckle, a small, breathy sound that slipped through her lips. Then it grew, filling the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. She wiped the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand, smearing blood against her fingertips, and laughed harder. Ethan froze. His hand, the one that had struck her, shook slightly. His eyes flickered, confusion creeping into his rigid expression. Margaret's composure faltered, just for a fraction of a second. That was all Olivia needed. She straightened, smoothing out her crimson silk gown, her heartbeat steady, her voice unwavering. "Perfect timing, Margaret," she said, her words crisp and deliberate. "You couldn't have planned it better if you tried." Uncovering the Carter family's crimes for a few seconds, the rooftop terrace remained frozen in silence. The slap still echoed in the minds of every guest, their expressions locked somewhere between horror and disbelief. Olivia held her ground, her heartbeat steady despite the stinging heat on her cheek. But inside, she felt something else, a rush of satisfaction. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Ethan stood rigid, his hands still hovering in the air as if his own body had betrayed him. His breathing was uneven, his pupils dilated. Olivia saw the hesitation, the flicker of uncertainty breaking through the mask of control. She had spent years studying these moments, documenting every shift in his behavior, every time he responded like a trained animal to his mother's subtle commands. Margaret, however, was unshaken. Her perfectly sculpted face remained composed, her lips curving into the faintest smile. She thought she had won. She thought this moment, the public humiliation, the shattered illusion of a perfect marriage, would break Olivia. But Margaret didn't realize that Olivia had been planning for this very moment. With a steady hand, Olivia reached into the small clutch she had been holding all night. A subtle movement, barely noticeable in the midst of the tension. Her fingers brushed against her phone, pressing a single button. Somewhere across the city, deep in a secure server she had set up months ago, a digital floodgate opened. Thousands of documents, bank records, offshore transfers, recorded conversations, were released in real time. They flowed through encrypted networks, reaching the inboxes of investigative journalists, federal agents, and key figures in law enforcement. A dead man's switch, triggered by an impact consistent with physical assault. And just like that, the Carter empire began to crumble. The first phone buzzed. Then another. Guests instinctively reached for their devices, their polite curiosity shifting into something more urgent. The hum of conversation changed, whispers, gasps, fingers scrolling frantically across screens. Margaret's smile faltered. Across the terrace, Ryan Carter, Ethan's cousin and the family's legal strategist, had already seen it. His jaw tightened, his grip on his champagne flute turning white-knuckled. He was scanning through the headlines, his Harvard-trained mind calculating every possible outcome. Breaking news: FBI opens investigation into Carter family financial scandal. Exclusive: insider leaks evidence of multi-million-dollar fraud and political corruption. Carter family heir linked to alleged psychological conditioning program. Margaret turned sharply toward Olivia, her eyes narrowing. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice low, controlled, but laced with fury. Olivia tilted her head, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face. "I simply let the truth out." Ethan looked around, confusion turning to panic as he saw the shifting energy in the room. He grabbed Olivia's wrist, his grip too tight, his voice desperate. "What is this? What did you do?" She met his gaze, calm, unwavering. "I exposed them, Ethan," she said softly. "I exposed everything." Margaret's control was slipping. The guests, many of whom had long benefited from the Carter family's influence, were now backing away, whispering among themselves. The police commissioner's wife was already tugging her husband toward the exit. Then, the sound of approaching sirens filled the night air. Ethan staggered back, eyes darting between his mother and Olivia, realization dawning too late. The Carter dynasty was collapsing, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The downfall of the Carter empire. The sirens grew louder, piercing through the tension that had settled over the rooftop terrace. The once elegant birthday celebration had transformed into something entirely different, chaos simmering beneath the surface, threatening to explode. Olivia stood still, watching the scene unfold, her breath steady, her hands unwavering. This was it. The moment she had spent years preparing for. Margaret Carter was the first to react. Always calculating, always a step ahead, or at least, she used to be. Her steel blue eyes scanned the room, assessing the shifting alliances, the unraveling facade of power she had so carefully maintained. The guests, once eager to bask in her presence, were now inching away, their faces illuminated by the damning headlines flashing across their phones. Olivia saw the subtle shift, the way influence evaporated the moment it became a liability. Ryan Carter, the family's legal fixer, was already moving toward the exit. He knew what was coming. Olivia had anticipated this. Ryan would try to distance himself, spin a new narrative, align with law enforcement before the full weight of the investigation came crashing down. But it was too late. The evidence had already been sent. The walls were closing in. Ethan, still reeling, ran a shaking hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked at Olivia, then at his mother, then back again, his mind struggling to piece together the reality that had just shattered around him. He had always followed orders, responded to commands, never questioned the carefully curated world he had been raised in. Now, for the first time, he was seeing the truth. And it terrified him. Margaret's voice cut through the air, sharp and controlled. "This is a private family matter," she announced, her signature authority creeping back in. "There has been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Olivia nearly laughed. That was Margaret's play: control the narrative, minimize the damage. But not this time. The carefully constructed house of lies had already begun to collapse, and Olivia had no intention of letting Margaret rebuild it. The first uniformed officers stepped onto the terrace, their presence shifting the atmosphere entirely. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to take action. One of them approached Margaret, speaking in a firm, measured tone. "Mrs. Carter, we have a warrant to seize all electronic devices and documents in your possession. We need you to come with us." For the first time in her life, Margaret Carter hesitated. It was brief, barely a flicker, but Olivia saw it. The unshakable matriarch, the mastermind behind decades of manipulation and power plays, was caught. Ethan took a step back, his breathing uneven. "Mother," he whispered, but it wasn't a plea. It was realization. The memories were coming back, the training, the conditioning, the whispered commands that had shaped his every decision. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had struck Olivia just minutes ago. Horror dawned in his eyes. Margaret turned to him, her voice urgent. "Ethan, listen to me. You have to know." The single word cut through the air like a blade. Olivia watched as Ethan, finally, for the first time, defied his mother. He shook his head, stepping away from her grasp. "You did this to me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To all of us." The agents moved in, securing the scene. Phones continued buzzing, news alerts, leaked reports, the entire world now watching as the Carter empire fell apart in real time. Olivia exhaled slowly, the weight of years of preparation settling over her. She had done it. The truth was out. As Margaret Carter was led away in handcuffs, her legacy of power and control reduced to nothing more than headlines and arrest records, Olivia met Ethan's gaze one last time. He was still lost, still unraveling, but for the first time, she saw something real, something free. The empire had fallen. And there was no going back. Justice as delivered. The courtroom was silent except for the steady ticking of the clock mounted above the judge's bench. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of years of deception, corruption, and betrayal. Olivia sat near the back, watching as Margaret Carter, the once untouchable matriarch, was led into the courtroom in an orange prison jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. The transformation was striking. Gone were the designer clothes, the flawless makeup, the aura of absolute control. Now, Margaret looked like what she truly was, a woman who had built an empire on manipulation and lies, only to watch it collapse around her. Reporters filled the gallery, their cameras clicking softly as the trial began. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the case with surgical precision, hundreds of pages of financial records proving fraudulent transactions, wire transfers linking Carter shell companies to offshore accounts, recorded conversations exposing a decades-long scheme of coercion, bribery, and psychological manipulation. It was overwhelming, undeniable. And every single piece of evidence led back to Margaret. The judge, a man known for his no-nonsense approach to corporate crime, listened intently, his gaze never leaving Margaret's stoic face. But Olivia knew better. She had seen the cracks forming in Margaret's armor. She had seen them the night of the party, when the FBI arrived, when Ethan finally broke free from his mother's control. And now, those cracks had widened into fractures that could never be repaired. Margaret's defense team, once the best money could buy, had crumbled. Ryan Carter, desperate to save himself, had turned state's witness almost immediately. He provided key testimony detailing how Margaret had orchestrated financial fraud, controlled Ethan through psychological conditioning, and manipulated politicians to protect the Carter empire. His betrayal was the final blow. And then, there was Ethan. He wasn't in court today. He was still in a specialized rehabilitation center, trying to untangle the years of control his mother had woven into his psyche. Olivia visited him once a month, offering him the truth piece by piece. Some days, he could handle it. Other days, it nearly broke him. But he was trying. That, at least, was something. The judge's gavel struck the bench, pulling Olivia from her thoughts. It was time. Margaret Carter stood as the judge prepared to read her sentence. There was no plea for mercy, no final act of control, just silence. Olivia watched as the judge's expression remained firm, his voice unwavering. For fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, this court sentences Margaret Carter to 30 years in federal prison. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Olivia let out a slow breath, absorbing the finality of it. Margaret didn't flinch, but Olivia saw the truth in her eyes, fear. Not for prison, but for what came next. She had spent her life controlling others. Now, she had nothing left to control. As the guards led Margaret away, Olivia rose from her seat, feeling lighter than she had in years. Justice had been served. But she knew her fight wasn't over. The Carter empire was gone, but there were others like them, others who thrived in the shadows, manipulating, controlling, destroying lives. She had brought down one dynasty. Now, she was ready to take on the next. Olivia's new purpose. The cold wind swept across the courthouse steps as Olivia stepped outside, her heels clicking against the stone pavement. The reporters were still inside, clamoring for statements, eager to dissect the final chapter of the Carter Empire's downfall. But Olivia had no interest in the spectacle. She had already won. Margaret Carter was gone, stripped of her power, her wealth, and the empire she had spent decades constructing. Justice had been served. But Olivia knew better than anyone that justice wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, already knowing what the message would say. Transfer approved. Funds redirected to Freedom and Justice Legal Foundation. A small smile played at her lips. Ethan had kept his word. The Carter fortune, what was left of it after the government's asset seizure, had been placed in a trust, earmarked for restitution and legal aid. And instead of keeping his personal share, Ethan had given it to Olivia's foundation, ensuring that the money once used to control lives would now be used to free them. She had seen him for the first time in months just the day before. He looked different, thinner, tired, but clear-eyed. There was no suit, no polished veneer, just a man still searching for himself beneath the years of manipulation. I don't know who I am without them, he had admitted, his voice quiet. Without their control. That's how you know you're finally free, Olivia had replied. You get to decide who you are now. For the first time since she had met him, he had smiled, not the forced, practiced expression she had grown used to, but something real. Now, standing at the courthouse steps, she let out a slow breath. Ethan's journey wasn't hers to walk, but she had given him the chance to take it. That was enough. Her focus was elsewhere now. She had already begun hiring lawyers, investigators, forensic accountants. The Freedom and Justice Legal Foundation was growing faster than she had anticipated. Calls were coming in daily, people trapped in coercive contracts, victims of psychological abuse, whistleblowers too afraid to come forward alone. She had built the case against the Carters in secret, in the shadows. Now, she was stepping into the light. The work ahead would be harder, bigger. There were more families like the Carters, more hidden empires built on control and corruption. But Olivia had spent 5 years dismantling one of the most powerful families in America. She could do it again. She would do it again. With one last glance at the courthouse behind her, Olivia turned and walked toward the waiting car. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. What would you have done in Olivia's place? Imagine uncovering a truth so dark, so dangerous, that it could destroy one of the most powerful families in America. Would you have the courage to expose it, knowing the risks? Let me know in the comments, what was the most shocking part of this story for you? Also, tell me where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far these stories reach. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because the next story is even more jaw-dropping. You don't want to miss it. Tomorrow, I'll take you into another world of deception, betrayal, and justice, and trust me, you'll be hooked from the very first second. Hit the like button if you love stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, and if you think Olivia made the right choice, drop your thoughts. Make these stories even better, and I can't wait to hear what you think. So, what would you have done in her shoes? Let's talk about it below.